He only wanted to share something he was proud of. A young black boy sat quietly in class, holding onto one truth about his family. But when he said his father worked at the Pentagon, the room exploded with laughter. His teacher didn't just doubt him, she turned his words into a lesson in humiliation. Heads shook, students smirked, and the boy's face fell in silence. What no one knew was that in just a few moments, the classroom door would open. And everything they believed about him was about to change forever. Malik Johnson was only 9 years old, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that stood out. He was the kind of child who listened more than he spoke, always careful with his words, always respectful. Every morning he arrived at school early with neatly pressed clothes, polished shoes, and a backpack packed the night before. His mother had taught him that preparation mattered, because the world would notice every mistake he made before it noticed anything good. At home, Malik's life was built on discipline and love. His mother worked long hours, and his father's job often kept him away for days at a time. Malik didn't fully understand everything his father did, only that it was important and that it served the country. Sometimes he would see official badges, hear serious phone calls, or watch his father leave before sunrise in a dark suit. To Malik, his father was more than impressive, he was a hero. School, however, felt different. In class, Malik noticed how some students were praised for speaking boldly, while he was told to stay in line. If he answered too confidently, it was seen as attitude. If he stayed quiet, he was overlooked. His teacher, Mrs. Carter, often smiled at other children in ways she never smiled at him. It was subtle enough to ignore, but sharp enough to feel. That morning, the class was asked to talk about their parents' careers and what they did for work. One by one, students spoke proudly while the room listened. Malik sat straighter in his chair, waiting for his turn, unaware that a single sentence was about to expose far more than anyone expected. When Malik's turn came, he stood carefully beside his desk and spoke the same way he had practiced in his head. He said his father worked at the Pentagon. He expected curiosity, maybe even respect. Instead, the room went silent for half a second, then laughter burst from every corner. Some students covered their mouths. Others leaned back in their chairs, openly amused. A few turned to stare at Malik as if he had told the wildest lie they had ever heard. He felt heat rush into his face, but he stayed standing. He knew what he had said was true. Mrs. Carter did not stop the laughter. She let it grow. Then she folded her arms and gave Malik a smile so thin it felt colder than anger. She told the class that imagination was powerful, but honesty was more important. She said children should never make up stories to impress people. The room laughed again, louder this time. Malik's hands tightened at his sides. He wanted to explain that he wasn't lying. He wanted to say he had seen the building, seen his father's identification badge, heard conversations he didn't fully understand. But every eye in the room told him not to speak. Every grin warned him that anything he said next would become another joke, so he sat down slowly. The rest of the lesson moved on, but for Malik, time dragged like a weight across the floor. He stared at the edge of his desk while whispers floated around him. One student asked if his father was secretly the president. Another wondered if Malik lived in a mansion with helicopters on the roof. Mrs. Carter heard it all and said nothing. Each laugh landed harder than the last. Malik had faced teasing before. He knew what it felt like to be doubted, to be judged before speaking, to watch adults believe other children instantly while questioning him. But this felt different. This was public, deliberate. A grown teacher had taken the side of mockery and called it a lesson. Then came the moment that made everything worse. Mrs. Carter walked to the front of the room and began speaking about truth, responsibility, and earning trust. She never said Malik's name, but every sentence pointed straight at him. She turned his humiliation into an example for the class. Heads nodded, pens scribbled notes. Malik felt smaller with every word. Outside, footsteps moved quickly through the hallway. No one noticed except Malik. He lifted his eyes toward the door, hearing the sound grow closer. There was urgency in it, sharp, confident steps that didn't slow down. Mrs. Carter continued talking, unaware. The students kept smirking, unaware. The handle turned. The classroom door opened halfway, then wider. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside with the calm presence of someone used to being obeyed. Behind him stood the principal, suddenly nervous and unusually polite. The room fell silent. Malik knew that face instantly. It was his father. Mrs. Carter's voice disappeared mid-sentence. The classroom, once loud with laughter, became so quiet that even shifting chairs sounded sharp. Every student stared at the man in the doorway. His suit was perfectly pressed, his posture straight, his expression controlled. But there was something in his eyes that changed the air in the room instantly. He walked in with calm authority, carrying a security badge clipped beside his jacket. The principal hurried behind him, suddenly smiling in a way no one had seen before. Mrs. Carter tried to recover, forcing a polite greeting, but her confidence was already gone. The man's eyes moved past everyone else and landed on Malik. In a single moment, the boy who had been shrinking into his chair sat taller. His father crossed the room, placed a steady hand on Malik's shoulder, and asked if he was all right. Malik nodded, but tears had already filled his eyes. Then his father turned back to the room. He spoke with the measured tone of someone trained to remain calm under pressure. He confirmed that he worked at the Pentagon and had come only because the school requested a parent visit for career day scheduling. But after hearing what had happened in the hallway, he asked a different question. Why had his son been publicly humiliated for telling the truth? No one moved. Mrs. Carter's face drained of color. The same teacher who had spoken so boldly moments earlier now struggled to answer. She mumbled about misunderstanding, about jokes, about keeping order in class. But every excuse sounded smaller than the silence around it. The students who had laughed now looked down at their desks. Some seemed ashamed, others shocked. For the first time, they were seeing how quickly cruelty spreads when authority approves it. Malik's father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke about how damaging it is when children are taught that certain families cannot belong in places of honor, power, or service. He spoke about the weight a child carries when truth is dismissed because of skin color. Then he looked directly at Mrs. Carter and said one final sentence that no one in that room would ever forget. The lesson taught here today was not about honesty, it was about prejudice. The meeting that followed happened behind closed doors, but the effects were seen by everyone. Mrs. Carter was removed from the classroom pending review, and parents across the school began asking difficult questions. How long had children been treated differently? How many moments had been dismissed as jokes, misunderstandings, or discipline when they were something far deeper? Malik walked out of that building beside his father with his head higher than when the day began. But the pain of that moment did not disappear just because the truth had been proven. He had still been laughed at, he had still been doubted. He had still learned at 9 years old that honesty is not always enough when prejudice enters the room first. At home, his father reminded him of something powerful: never let someone else's ignorance define your worth. Malik held onto those words. In time, the embarrassment faded, but the lesson remained. He became more confident, more determined, and more aware of how easily bias can hide behind authority. Because this story was never only about one teacher or one classroom. It was about the quiet ways racism survives, in lowered expectations, instant disbelief, public humiliation, and the assumption that some children do not belong in places of success or power. These moments may seem small to those who cause them, but to the child living through them, they can last for years. The world often imagines racism as something loud and obvious. But sometimes it sounds like laughter in a classroom. Sometimes it looks like a smile before an insult. Sometimes it begins when no one chooses to speak up. So the question is simple. When the next Malik is doubted, mocked, or underestimated, will the room laugh again, or will someone finally stand up?